Hello everyone and welcome to Season 6, Episode 50 of Pro Wrestling's Top 50. I'm your host Travis McNeil, and today we complete our countdown of the top 50 matches of 2021 with match number 1 on our list. This is it, the best match of 2021 in my opinion, and it is a match that when I started this project for Season 6, I, rewatched it. I thought there was potential it would end up on the top 50. In no way, shape, or form did I expect it to be the number 1 match on this list, but it blew me away on the rewatch. When comparing it to all of the other great matches that there were in 2021, I kept going back to this one. And at the end of the day, nothing could compare to it. You've probably, seen or read a lot of best of 2021 lists. I don't know if any other one has this as their top match, especially one that's, so all-encompassing like my list. But ultimately, no other match could hold a candle to this one for my money in the year. So our number 1 match of 2021 was for the PWF Crystal Coast Oceanic title between the champion Colby Corino and the challenger Steve Corino from the PWF Colby Corino's 25th anniversary show held on August the 27th of 2021. The reason why this match hit number 1 is just no story in any pro wrestling match last year gripped me and captivated me like this one did. This is a match between legitimate father and son. It is wrestled just like any match I could, imagine that would be father versus son. And it is an absolute masterpiece of a pro wrestling match. The PWF is this little, off the radar promotion. If you're unfamiliar with it, Steve Corino started the PWF in the Pennsylvania area, coming out of, the shadow of ECW's demise. So it was, early 2001. The indies were really just starting to boom. So he booked this promotion with himself on top. A lot of ex-ECW guys littered throughout the card. All of, kind of the big indie up-and-comers at the time, Amazing Red and the SATs were all over those cards. And the PWF is probably most remembered, if anybody remembers it at all, from that time of bringing in Shinya Hashimoto, who was the NWA World Heavyweight Champion at the same time. Steve Corino, after ECW left, he started going to and wrestling for 01 in Japan, which was Hashimoto's promotion, became very close to him and Otani and Masato Tanaka that he also knew from his ECW days. So he brought him in, and famously they had a 4-way 30-minute Iron Man match with Corino, Hashimoto. Gosh, I don't even remember the 2 names of the other guys at this point, and it's really bothering me because I can picture them in my head. But just really, that early kind of mixed bag indies, like your USA Pro and all of your promotions of the time, where, you'd get some okay stuff and you'd get some really bad stuff there. So he ran the PWF for a couple of years in the early 2000s. The promotion faded away. And then in the mid 2010s, it came back, like, I want to say like 2015-ish. Corino was semi-active. He'd been wrestling a little bit in Ring of Honor and was looking at wrapping up his career, and he would relaunch the PWF this time in North Carolina before he would ultimately, end up with the WWE in his current role. Funny because, when the PWF started, it was a Corino on top, and now with the PWF, it's another Corino on top. It is Steve Corino's son, Colby. Colby Corino has been around wrestling his entire life. I remember reading an article about Steve in Whoa or Wow, depending on how you want to pronounce it, magazine back in 2000. There was a period of time where Steve Corino was my favorite wrestler in the year 2000. I loved watching him go from, annoying heel to old school hero, ECW World Heavyweight Champion, bleeding all over the place in every match. I loved Steve Corino, and they did an article in that magazine, talking about his life, and he talked about having a young son, being Colby. Corino worked a show in my hometown of Brantford, Ontario, in like the early 2010s, like maybe 2011. And he wrestled Tatanka, and I believe they went to like a 15-minute draw, which was really weird. But Colby Corino at that point, would have been maybe 15 years old, like 14 or 15 years old, depending on when it was. And I remember him like in the ring getting like chopped by Tatanka. That made me like really uncomfortable because like he really looked like a kid. But ultimately, he's developed into quite the pro wrestler. He was a member of the Ugly Ducklings team with Lance Lude and Rob Killjoy. He unfortunately faced a lot of issues with drugs, which he's been very open about. But he seems to have gotten his life back on track, and he's a very, very talented pro wrestler. So for Colby Corino's 25th birthday, he had requested a match with his dad, with Steve. Very rare for a WWE contracted wrestler to wrestle outside of the WWE. And I shouldn't say WWE contracted wrestler. Steve doesn't wrestle anymore. He was retired, working as a trainer and producer through the NXT system and whatnot. But, still very rare to see somebody on a WWE contract appearing on an indie show like this. We'll sometimes see it with like Jerry Lawler and guys like that, but it is quite rare. They did a promo that got posted on social media where this challenge was laid down. And I remember, commenting on that and just being like, this is a really cool match. I wasn't expecting it to be anything amazing, but I just thought in theory it was pretty cool. When are you ever going to see a father and son wrestle? There's a bunch of different ways they can go with it. As being, a big Steve Corino fan, I was happy to see him wrestle once again, and to see how it went. This match, though, it's perfect. It is a masterpiece of a pro wrestling match. It's under the radar. If you haven't seen it, you need to. I know I got some buzz when it was released online. Some wrestlers put it over. I think Chris Hero was one that gave it a lot of positive comments. But I watched it and I couldn't believe how good it was. And obviously, like I said at the top, I rewatched it for this project. But just being able to really dig into it and to watch it completely distraction free, like I do for all of the matches that I consider for these lists, and to go down and take my notes from it and really analyze it. And when I rank these matches, I put them against each other to try to compare. And the Nakajima and Keno match that hit number 2 was the closest one I had to possibly dethroning this match. But I watched this one maybe at the midway point. I watched 107 matches and whittled them down to my top 50. And I watched this one at maybe about the halfway point of that 107, and just nothing could compare to it. Matches would get close, but ultimately they didn't have the effect on me that this one did. Maybe it's because I'm a dad. I don't know. Maybe it's because I didn't have the best relationship with my dad growing up. I don't know. Maybe it's because I had adult males in my life, like my uncle, who exposed me to pro wrestling and got me to love pro wrestling. I don't know. But this match, it connected for me on such a deep, deep level. And in the opening for it, it sets the tone right away that Colby Corino is wearing gear modeled after Steve Corino's famous gear that he wore in his late ECW run. Colby Corino at this point is basically a spitting image of early Steve Corino. Steve Corino for this match was in maybe the best shape of his career. He was, very, very skinny, in his early indie run in the late 90s and his, ECW run. He bulked up, in Japan and being a heavyweight. But he is in excellent shape here. I don't know if it's working out at the WWE Performance Center or what, but he was in fantastic shape. And the thing that is brilliant about this match is wrestled in a very old school way. And, I talk so many times in these videos about the little things in wrestling that can add to matches. And this one is just full of them. There's all of these little nuances and these little bits of physicality that just create, this great atmosphere for the match that you're watching, and these little bits that you can pick up on. But also they just have this overarching story through everything, this story of resentment. And, Colby Corino has expressed, like, when he was a kid growing up, Steve was not there for him at all. He was traveling the globe, and sure, he'd bring, Colby around sometimes, but, he never had that father-son relationship that he looked for, that now Colby, being a young dad, is trying to instill with his child. And that's something that, I can connect with on a very deep level as a father now. I had, a father that worked all of the time, that, I didn't necessarily feel love from, and I didn't get that, nurturement from, and I would have to get that from other people and create a lot of it myself. And now with my children, I try to be everything that my father wasn't for me as a kid. But then from Steve's point, he talks about how, he had to do those things, and he had to make those sacrifices to be able to provide for his son. And that's something that I could certainly see in my father. My father worked all of the time to try to provide for, our family. And now as a dad, like, I struggle to find that balance, and, I have a very heavy workload as well. So, it's, you take these real life things and you transport them into, our escapism, which is professional wrestling. And it blurs these lines, and it becomes very real. It becomes a little bit uncomfortable, but at the end of the day, it's what works, because it's so close to home, and that's where you get that deep effect from it. The match itself is brilliant. They start out, it's very clean. They try, to do some mat work, and it's all very even, and nobody's really getting the advantage. And, Steve Corino goes for a knuckle lock, and he's wrestling his kid, and, they're trying to have a proper wrestling match, and Colby Corino kicks him in the leg. And Steve, like, stares daggers at him, and it's the ultimate, like, disappointed father look, like, trying to keep your kid in check and being like, listen, you don't want to test me here. I talk about the little things, but it's so great, because then, Colby's able to use that leg he just kicked in weekend to get the takedown, to get the advantage on the mat. And, Steve is able to wrestle out of everything until at some point, Colby just ties up all of his limbs, and Steve really has to fight out to try to get a free limb to grab the rope. It creates a story of, like, Steve's retired. He hasn't wrestled in a long time. He's older. He's slower. Colby is part of this new generation of these fast-paced, crazy wrestlers. He's done a death match, for crying out loud. And Steve really can't keep up with him, but what Steve has is he has the experience, he has the high ring IQ, and at the end of the day, Steve Corino can be an evil man, and, would he channel that against his own child? We would find out. Colby is I talk about Steve and his character work in this match, and the internal conflict he has, and, the story of him being pushed by his kid, and will it send him, into that Steve Corino of old, into that evil Steve Corino. But Colby is so amazing in this match too, at points being fearful of his dad, at other points standing up to his dad, at points, mocking his dad, and taking his resentments out on his dad, and finally getting, this, basically these two are essentially having a heart-to-heart, conversation about all of the issues they had throughout their lives, but they're doing it in the form of a wrestling match, which is crazy. So Colby, he pushes the pace a lot here. There's a moment where Steve ties Colby's arm up in the ropes and, goes to kick it, but he can't do it. He can't bring himself to stoop that low quite yet. So, Colby goes back to the leg and kicks him, and it leads to this moment of conflict where Steve finally, like, unloads and just slaps the hell out of Colby and drops him. And it becomes, like, almost like this shock in him of, like, oh my God, I hit my kid. Like, what have I done? But in a way, like, that's what Colby has been looking for. He wants, he doesn't want to sweep these issues under the rug anymore. He wants them to come to a head, and he knows that the only way he can get through to his dad to do it is through, let's be honest, Steve Corino is his son, but his first love, maybe even the love that he put, more to the forefront than his child is wrestling. And maybe that needs to happen in a wrestling ring. And it leads to them, trading kicks and slaps. And, there's an excellent moment where Colby grabs Steve by the arm and just starts unloading with kicks to the arm, which is something that Steve couldn't do. Steve gets into a mount position and, is about to ground and pound his, Colby, but kind of has those reservations again and backs off. And what I love so much about this match is if you took this match and you transported it into, let's say, NXT, I feel like there would be so much over the top, forced melodrama and forced, facial reactions to get on camera and to really beat the viewer over the head with the story that they're trying to tell. And none of that happens here. It's all very subtle. Yes, there's looks. Yes, there's lines of dialogue. But it never feels phony and it never feels forced or over the top. And the match is all the better for it. And it's, this is where I think that the indies have that like rawness and that realness to it a lot of the time. This match works so much better being in this, fringe promotion like PWF than it would be, anywhere else. Some of the work that they do in this match, I talk about just, simple, basic little things. They do like amazing work around a headlock, some of the best headlock work that you're going to see, with Steve basically controlling with this headlock and it building frustration within Colby, because before that, they do this moment where Colby, puts the arms behind his back and basically, eggs his dad on to hit him, and Steve drops him with the big chop, and Colby starts talking all of this trash and egging him on and on and on. And then finally, it fires Colby up enough and he starts chopping Steve back. And, how many times have you, if you're a parent or, if you're a child, have you been in an argument with your parent or with your child where, the younger, more emotional person in that situation gets so fired up and the other person like basically just has to calm them down? How many times have you seen your child, worked up and frustrated and crying, and you just have to give them a big hug and say like, it's okay, and console them? And that's basically what Steve Corino does to Colby, but in the form of a side headlock, just basically trying to calm him down with that hold and to stop the strike exchange and to stop the high emotions that are flaring out. But, if you're in that position where, you don't want someone to tell you everything's going to be okay. You don't want someone to calm down. You want to let your emotions out. And that creates this frustration in Colby, because that's essentially what Steve Corino has been doing all of his life, building to this point where they have this match. And it's just these amazing subtle things, throughout this match where they tell the story that they want to tell. And maybe, I pick up more of it than they're even intending. I don't know, but I'm like I said, I was just able to dial into this on such a deep level. Colby Corino throughout this, he knows at the end of the day he's the better athlete, he's the better new generation wrestler. So he tries to pick up the pace. And it leads to another just excellent moment where Steve Corino, yes, he's in great shape, but he's heavier, he's carrying more weight and muscle around. He's been inactive for so long, he's older, he's seen a lot of life. He needs a breather, and he kind of goes to the corner just to try to catch his breath and get a little space and take a little bit of a rest. And Colby does not allow him to do that at all, and he just unloads on him with these crazy stomps. And again, there's just this little subtle moment of Steve trying to like grab on to Colby just to say like, I'm your dad. And Colby just swats his arm away and then grabs his own side headlock to make him pay. And basically be like, I can do this to you, Dad. Like, how do you like it? How does it feel? At about the midway point of this match, they go an interesting route, because I feel like the easy story here was for Colby Corino, to be the baby face that gets, smacked around by his dad throughout all of this match. But they kind of have Colby take the more heel route, really just talking mad trash to his dad, you know, being disrespectful and, you know, kicking him in the head and slaps and double stomps and, you know, being really, really hyper aggressive and trying to egg him on into all of these strike exchanges. And there's a moment where, you know, Steve finally starts to get rolling. And, you know, he's had enough, and he drops Colby with a forearm, and he has this flash of being the Steve Corino of old, and he actually gears up for a suicide dive. And Colby sees this coming, and it strikes that fear into him where he knows, like, oh, maybe I've unleashed the beast in my dad. Maybe I've pushed him too far, and maybe I shouldn't have done this. And he cuts off the tope with a really fast leg lariat. And for the first time in the match, he tries to end it, and he tries to get a near fall. And the mood in the match kind of shifts a little bit at that point. Another moment that I loved, because it reminded me of my uncle, who I no longer have a relationship with, and I'm clearly not going to get into in this video, but he was the one that really, you know, fostered the wrestling fan in me throughout my life. And, you know, he would do this thing sometimes where he'd put me in an iron claw a lot, but he would also just grab my nose like this between his two knuckles. And he wouldn't, like, do it to be abusive or anything, like, please don't get it twisted there. You know, he would just, when we would play wrestle, like, that would be, you know, how if I would start to take it too far and start to really ramp things up, you know, he'd grab me by the nose like that. And there's a moment where, like, Colby's got Steve in the corner and is just working on him, and Steve grabbed him by the nose the same way, and ended up, you know, hitting a big suplex. And when he did that, that was the point of the match really for me, where I was like, this is the most authentic, you know, feeling I've ever felt watching wrestling, because this is me as a child with my uncle in this same scenario. This is a dad or an uncle or, you know, any adult role model father figure you had in your life, you know, wrestling with their kid. And I loved it. And Steve, you know, kind of, after he gets back into this, and like I said, he's kind of been fired up, and he's starting to have that old Steve Corino come out. You know, he starts punching Colby in the corner. And what I loved, and where you really see the shift happen in Steve in this match, is Colby kind of like slinks down in the corner. And, you know, rather than back off like he'd been doing all match and give his son the opportunity to rest, you know, if you think back to Colby, you know, stomping Steve in the corner when Steve was trying to get that breather, Steve actually pulls Colby back up and just continues to unload on him with punches. And that's the point of the match where you're like, oh man, this is Steve Corino. This is ECW World Heavyweight Champion Steve Corino. This is NWA World Heavyweight Champion Steve Corino. This is Ring of Honor Tag Team Champion Steve Corino. You know, this is the king of old school. This is the evil man. He's back, and his son, you know, he brought it out of him, and he doesn't know what he's done. Colby, you know, still, you know, fights in it and stays in it, and he, you know, grabs his dad by the beard and grabs his dad by the hair, and he's just incredibly disrespectful and, you know, talking trash all throughout. Steve gets these little, like, glimmers of hope. Colby runs into, like, a big Bubba Cutter, like the toss-up Ace Crusher, but Steve can't capitalize on that. Steve, you know, tries to end up getting the Shinjiro Otani face wash in the corner. You know, I mentioned that 0-1 connection that he had, but Colby's able to block it, hit his own, which is like crazy disrespectful, hits the old, like, Ugly Ducklings cannonball in the corner and hits a big Sky Twister press for 2. So the real difference at this point is, you know, Colby is trying to win this match and end this match, because at the end of the day, it's for his title. And that's something that in the early goings of the match, you know, you forget that it's a title bout, and you really just focus on the father and son detail. And you know what, Steve isn't really going for a lot of falls. He doesn't want to be the PWF Crystal Coast Oceanic champion. You know, he's got a WWE gig. He doesn't want to continue to wrestle and defend this title. This is his son's title. For him, you know, maybe he could care less that it's a title match. But when they have that shift where it becomes more real to Colby of like, my God, like my belt's on the line. Like, this is my livelihood that's on the line right now. And when you see Steve start to shift back into his older self, he realizes, maybe I can win this belt. Like, maybe this is what I need. Maybe I'm not done quite yet. Maybe I'm not ready to hang it up. And if I have to beat my son to do it, then so be it. And, this match is really stiff throughout it. It's father versus son. They have these built-up resentments. Colby gets his lip busted open. He's got a wicked shiner at one point. When Colby's going for offense, there's a point where Steve just becomes like so desperate to cut him off up top because he knows, that the top rope is where Colby's really comfortable. And he drops him with like an apron Death Valley driver, which was brutal. He hits the tope that he teased earlier. He hits a big power slam and he gets the 2 count and he tries to win that match and tries to win the title. And you go into this, final closing stretch of this match where it is much more akin to any, big prize title fight match that you would see where these guys are wrestling to win and they're unloading their big guns. And it's, it almost in a way feels like, okay, a lot of that father-son stuff that had built up through, maybe they're finally seeing each other on their level and Steve understands, everything that Colby's been talking about and Colby understands Steve's perspective. And at the end of the day, they might be two very different people, with how they go about, being fathers and their relationships with each other, but they have more in common than they think. They're both pro wrestlers and that's that competition that's going to drive them. Colby ends up cutting Steve up top, gets a bunch of near falls. He goes for like a funky, like flipping driver thing that he does as his finisher. And just something simple that I loved here. And this is where, we go back to like, Steve's, not the young athletic wrestler that Colby is, but he's got that high IQ. Colby goes for this elaborate, like, I'm going to hook you in an abdominal stretch and grab a pump handle, and then I'm going to flip and drop you on your head. And Steve just counters it to a roll up and gets a 2 count and almost wins my favorite near fall of the entire match. But then Colby kind of responds from that and hits a big spinning kick and it knocks Steve's mouth guard out. And for the first point in the match, you start to see, the flip side of the coin where at the start it's Steve, begging off from Colby and, it's his son. And this is the first time in the match where I think Colby sees Steve, not only as his dad that tried his best, but also as this, this older athlete. And he actually begs off and he wants the referee to do the 10 count. The kick knocks Steve's mouth guard out. And you see this broken, battered older man that's also your father lying on the mat. Colby doesn't have the heart at this point to go and pin him. He just wants to leave it alone and end it. He doesn't want to pounce on him. And the flip side at this point, like we have Steve Corino, the king of old school back. And he eggs Colby on. He doesn't want to be cast aside. He doesn't want pity taken on him by anybody, especially his son. He wants to go out on his sword. And now it's him, begging, Colby to continue the fight, just like Colby did earlier. They trade shots. Something that I love is Steve Corino hits the Rainmaker in it, which I thought was so cool because like that's, dads are always trying to be cool, right? And whenever we know that's something that is, cool to our kids, we say, oh yeah, I'm hip too, right? So, what better move to try than the Rainmaker, right? So he hits this big Rainmaker and he hits the old school expulsion, his old finishing maneuver. He hits it for 2. Colby gets the kick out, hits a flash kick again. But this time, he knows he can't make the same mistake and beg off and let his dad rest, that he has to put the bullet in Old Yeller. He has to put his dad out to pasture. And the way he does it too is so poetic. He drops him with a brainbuster. Shinya Hashimoto's brainbuster, right? I talked about Steve's correct, connection to Hashimoto and how much, the late, NWA World Champion, IWGP Heavyweight Champion, 0-1 Champion, meant to Steve. So to drop him with that move, it only gets him a 2. There's no way Steve's going out to that move. But then Colby, goes back to his finish, that flipping, abdominal stretch sort of driver thing. And before he does it, and, this could have come across so hokey, but like I said, it's not forced. It's not, when the WWE production machine, he throws out one last comment and it's, I'd say I'm sorry, but I'm not. right? The takeoff of the Shawn Michaels and the Ric Flair, I'm sorry, I love you. And it could have been hokey, but they sold it so well and it really worked for me. And it was this bow on this amazingly captivating story that they told. He hits him with the flipping driver. It's enough for 3. We get a great, post-match with a great promo from Steve. And the whole package is excellent. PWF presented this match so well. Whoever they had on commentary did a really good job at, talking about the history between the father and son and the story they were trying to tell. But like I said, when I watched this match, before this match happened, I thought, oh, cool, father versus son, that's neat. I love Steve. Cool to see him do another match. When I watched it the first time, I was like, holy shit, like that was a really good match. It took me by surprise. And when I watched it for this project, it's one of the best matches I've seen in recent memory. It's a match I'll never forget. It deserves to be heralded and championed as an absolute masterpiece. And it is far and away the best match of 2021. You can watch this one on IWTV. You can subscribe to my channel here on YouTube so that you never miss a video. Follow me on Instagram and Twitter at Wrestling50. And please join me again next time as we start a brand new countdown, Season 7, counting down the top 50 matches in Chikara Pro history. That will be coming soon. Keep an eye on the socials for when it drops. Thanks for watching as always, and take care. Bye-bye.